Well, thanks for all of you coming. It's good to have some feedback on what I'm doing. So what I'm going to share today is actually some reflections over the last years based on three elements of my life, my professional, personal, and my, if we can call that the research part of myself. Just some keywords of who I am, for those who haven't met me before, but also for the million hits on the YouTube channel. It's good to know. Who am I? So one of the things I always find very difficult is to give a definition of what I do from a professional point of view. It's always very fragmented. For my personal part of that, I leave it to my therapist to reply my fragmentation. But from a professional point of view, there are three main areas that more or less define what I am. And one of the good things of internet is that just Google chaos and diversity, and it gave me a picture that was exactly more or less what I was looking for. Now there's one part of myself that is executive coaching and counseling. And basically, I coach individuals since 2008, and most of them in a cross-cultural environment. I've been in contact with more than 100 people. Only one of them comes from Spain. I am Spanish. So most of my clients are definitely in a cross-cultural environment. They do work or they live in cross-cultural environments. And one of the things that came regularly and frequently in the work with these people are two things. The first one is that we tend to talk a lot about how important it is to respect the other, particularly when we're dealing with cross-cultural elements, but we barely talk about what are the limits of respect. What happens when those limits are reached? And how do we find those limits? How do we find those boundaries? And linked to that, there's a second idea that often comes forward, which is we all believe that we do the right thing, or at least the thing we believe is the most adequate to what we're doing. But some of the times, I would say more often than not, we have never tried to do differently. We're convinced that what we're doing is the right thing to do, but actually we've never done the other thing. So we don't have the experience of what it is to do what we believe is not as good as the way we behave. And still we're very certain that what we do, it is the right thing to do. The second part of my life is somehow exploration of researching. Very much welcome. Sorry for the delay. We started too early. But one of the things that happened in my life is that very early I realized that I was not meant to grow vertically. I didn't enjoy particularly to do something better and better all the time. I normally get bored with it. So I believe that growing was more about doing things differently or doing different things. When I tried it on me, what I realized is that I was permanently exposed to great novelty, but high degrees of uncertainty, always challenging myself, am I doing the right thing? It is okay to leave this very good, well-paid job to do something different. And I've always dealing with what it is to be uncertain. So I started to think a lot about uncertainty, what it is to feel uncertain about something, and why should it matter in any way. But through years, I realized that one of the things that comes across, particularly in my clients, that brings more uncertainty to their lives is sustained cross-cultural environments, where suddenly the way of being is permanently challenged on a daily basis. And then they feel in a particular way that I would describe later as disoriented, in the sense that they really don't know anymore what to do. The challenge is real. I permanently feel challenged. I feel uncomfortable. But basically, I don't know what to do next. So I realized that cross-cultural interaction is a source of uncertainty. The third aspect of my life that I think it's one of the sources of what I'm expressing here today is about my work as entrepreneur or consultant. I've been dealing with multicultural teams for already more than 10 years. I've worked with and in more than 30 countries, and I was very good at it. And I was particularly good at finding agreements and arrangement with other cultures. And one of the feedbacks I received is that I never approached those negotiations as if I had the truth, but just that I have some good ideas to share with people. And I was very proud of it. I was, I'm so good at cross-cultural context and so on, until I found my own limits to change. And I found that on my personal level. And when I found my limits, when I found a place where I would not tolerate what was going on the other side of the table, on an emotional level, it really reconnected immediately with the experience of many of my clients in coaching, saying, oh, that's interesting. So what I am experiencing now as, I can't move any further, is what many of my clients were talking in their teams, and being incapable to do different, because I felt I couldn't do different anymore. So all these three elements came together to try to explain something that I've been dealing regularly, which is multicultural teams. One of the things that Johnson, in a paper in 2006, said is that when you look at the literature about cross-cultural training or cross-cultural issues in organizations, there are two things. One, that expert traits normally fail in the sense of being able to develop the new business in that culture according to what they expect it to be. And they fail because apparently they cannot adapt fully to the new environment. The second thing that comes in this literature is that normally headquarters have difficulties to understand how difficult it is. What are the real challenges of being abroad? Now, my experience of those three elements, together with that, which I agree, by the way, that's my experience too. Experts normally fail in their assignment to be fully integrated. Not always, but often. They suffer more than what they believe they could. Second thing, I think headquarters normally have a problem to understand what is actually happening for those people there. Now, two questions come to my mind. The first one is, why, and I believe there is a truth, focusing on cultural knowledge is not enough. It doesn't matter how much knowledge I give you about what it is to live in China, it's not enough. It's not enough. I can bring the most cultural sensitive individual and still it would not work. Or I have high chances, high probability that it may not work. And the second question is about, it is really a need to focus on avoiding conflicts within multicultural teams. Do I have to find people who are very open-minded and generous and networking to be able to create harmony in multicultural teams? Is that a way that works in organizations? And should that be an aim for organizations? And I hope I can give an answer to those questions to what I'm going to do today. I start my thinking based on some assumptions, like everybody does. When talking about cross-cultural issues, I basically have three, based on my experience and the literature I have read. First one is that, yes, there is a training organization that moves from training people in knowledge to profiling people. We have moved from telling them what is important to know about working in Southeast Asia from a cultural point of view, to do these people have the skills, to do these people have the profile? Is this something about the personality that fits or not in the culture? And there is a trend to that. Still, when you go at cross-cultural training in organizations, you will find that most of it is about knowledge. Even in trainings for expats, if I look at what is being doing in China, which is hub of having a lot of people, expats there, there's a lot of training about very basic cultural traits of what it is to be Chinese. That, yes, good to know. Does it help to your expats, to your managers to lead a team? I have my doubts. Second thing is that we're looking mainly about avoiding conflict. But more than that, we are trying to bring people that can express the values and the way we do in organizations in headquarters, Germany, for example, and be able to convey those messages in a way that is understood and is embraced by the other culture. Now, we're looking for a profile that does that without conflict. And by doing that, we are avoiding what it is actually happening in those conflicts. The third element is that no matter how you think about it, there is no choice, I would say on a personal level, but definitely on a business level, to choose not to be global. That is something that nowadays is not possible. And I'll give you an example that happened 2 months ago, discussing with small manufacturers in the Philippines. They believe that they don't need to become global because they only want to sell to the little island. But the problem is that the main competitor is not in the island. It's someone in China producing very cheap electronic goods. Now they cannot avoid not being global. They are competing, whether they want or not, with the global economy. Now, what I want to do today, or what I want to talk about today, follows this flow. First of all, I want to give you an idea of what I understand about basic concepts that will build on later on the explanation. And the first one is how I see culture, what are values for me, and what is self-identity. The second part of it is a group of concepts that deal with what happens in conflicts, what it is, what I call tolerances of disorientation, and when change may happen. Then I just want to have a brief look at what are the main things that nowadays in literature they talk about global culture and self-identity. What are the things that now are accessible to us? And then I would move on to what I believe is happening in individuals and organizations. And for that, I will be looking at the two main concepts today, inclusiveness and exposure, and then later on, how it's now handled with organizations and what could we do differently. Good. I follow a definition of culture that was, first of all, presented by Ralph Linton in a book in 1945, which says that basically culture is a heritage transmitted to our children, enable them to adapt to their environment. And that sits very well how I see things. I believe that actually the only thing that we're able to transmit to the kids when we do is things that help them operate in the context they have been brought up. He distinguishes between two different levels of culture. One that he believes that is unconscious, that is a real culture, and one that is an individual judgment on my own culture, which is what he calls a built culture. Now, although I agree with that definition, I think it suits well with how I present things. The only thing I want to make a remark is I don't believe that the real culture is on an unconscious level in a Freudian sense, that you don't access and is somewhere there, hidden in your psyche, and the built culture is something that you have access to that. I believe that real and built culture is just a kind of a pendulum, and you move depending on what you have in front of you. If I say, do you remember your math teacher in first grade? And some of you may have an image of this lady who was not in your head before I asked the question. So until I asked the question, it was perfectly unconscious. Now it is conscious. And I think it's the same with real culture. It is in your background until your real culture is challenged for whatever reason, and then it moves from the background to the foreground and becomes built culture. But also things that are part of your built culture, that you have made a judgment of it, if eventually it's not any more challenged, may go back to the background until it's challenged again. Now, what do I think we transmit? When Ralph Linton was saying about we transmit things, for me, we only transmit behaviors. And it's behaviors that have been proved to be useful to a particular group, to a particular community. Now, we don't transmit values, we don't transmit concepts, we transmit a particular behavioral repertoire. In previous presentations about uncertainty, I call it coping strategy. And what I mean with that is that what we are transmitting is a particular toolbox where kids or us know how to pick up depending on the challenge in front of us. And that's what we have. And those toolbox are not values, are just behaviors that have been good enough for the challenge ahead. Now, interestingly for me is that those behaviors that we transmit that are very good because they have proved to be useful, normally define what works well in one particular situation, but it doesn't say what doesn't, or it doesn't offer an alternative to it, particularly when they become values. Normally when we talk about values, we talk about behaviors that have been so good at dealing with something that have become unchallenged. It's a particular course of action that has been so useful, so adapted to the challenge ahead of us, that has gone to the background. You don't challenge that anymore. It becomes a value. A value is something I value. And I value it very much because it's good for me to be adapted. Now, the interesting thing for me is that these behaviors are not only actions, they are, of course, actions and a way to react to the challenges, but also, most, for me, very important, it limits or it shapes, it's a better word, the way we see the world. Because I have a particular behavioral repertoire, that is how I see the world. I don't see it differently. It shapes to a certain extent how I see the world. I would say that we do have a behavioral repertoire in different dimensions, and I choose 4 of them because I believe it represents well what it is, which is that I do have a set of what it is, my body and my physical survival and the behaviors that would deal with it. I don't have particular joy in putting my hand in the oven when it's warm, but I do have an idea that if it's very warm, it will hurt me. If I've never seen an oven, and I see that in my little girl, she has absolutely no idea that she cannot get herself into the oven. She hasn't had that experience. I do have an idea of what I am as a person, what it is to be Jon, what it is me and the others, what is my social context, and something that, thanks the work to Clement, that is transcendent, which is what is my sense of being in the universe. And for some people it's a spiritual world, for some people it's a religious world, but I would say that all of us, we have to a certain extent an idea of what it is to be part of this whole thing, whatever more or less developed. And values will be more visible in one or the other depending on the challenges that our context is experiencing. Now, something I take from positive psychotherapy is about the way we transmit things, is something they call modeling. Now, they believe, or they argue that one of the main sources for learning and for training kids is pure modeling. And kids will simply pick up on the way we do things, the way we respond to things. We act as parents as unconscious, or conscious, hopefully, role models. But the thing that the kids are modeling, again, is not values. It's the way we act in one particular context, in one particular situation. They imitate our behavior. With the reading of our emotional experience of that challenge. If I see a lion in this room and my daughter is here and she sees that I'm panicking, she will immediately feel that that is something wrong. But what she's experiencing is my reaction to that, my behavior. Now, just to reinforce, and I don't want to dwell too much on that, we can't transmit values. It's impossible. In order to transmit values, the kid has to have already an abstract thinking to communicate values. You can't have that. The abstract thinking comes later. What you do is behaviors. But not just behaviors. I think it's very important. We transmit good behaviors. Behaviors that have been useful. Problem is that if my context doesn't change over the years, and I carry on believing or transmitting that one behavior has proved to be useful, is useful, and I carry on doing it on my kids and the kids and the kids and my kids, the context in which that behavior is useful disappears, becomes unnoticeable. The behavior and the context are dissociated. I never think anymore about my behavior as a result of one particular context. I think of my behavior as an absolute, and that is why it becomes values. And the more I dissociate context and my behavior, the less interest and motivation to test those behaviors that I believe are not that good. They just simply remain untested. Just as a line to show how I see it, basically, I act in a world, I experience a particular pattern of behavior that becomes of relating, that becomes my behavioral repertoire. They become assumptions about the world, which are my values, about myself, my social interaction, about the world itself, and once I have those assumptions, it redefines my ability to see the world. For me, values is just a behavioral repertoire, it's a toolbox. And this is a quote from a crime novel from Lawrence Block. One of the characters is Matthew Streeter. If you like crime novels, I highly recommend it. What he said, when your only tool is a hammer, you believe that every problem is a nail. And this is very extreme, but my experience is that we are like that. We are like that. We are meant to beat, to eliminate differences in the world we see the world, to make sure that we have a tool to deal with it. And the only way we suddenly realize there are differences is if the challenge ahead of us is so different that we don't have tools to deal with it. As long as we have a tool that more or less gives me the feedback I'm expecting, I use my tool. I don't have to redefine anything. My tool works. And if it doesn't work exactly the same, I can find millions of mental justifications why it doesn't. But my tool works. Works good enough. The only way that we stop seeing a nail is when it really fails. When our tool cannot work anymore. How do I see self-identity? I don't believe in self-identity as a very complex concept. I think that self-identity is just our behavioral repertoire. The way we deal with the world is the way we are. And there is a self-reflection about the way we deal with the world, but even the self-reflection is about our behavioral repertoire and the tools accessible to us. Basically, for me, if I manage to have a new behavior, if I add a new tool to my box, I'm changing my new identity, my self-identity. If my context where I live is very stable, and it's very stable over the years, I have high chances to believe that my identity is very, very stable, and I would have very strong opinions about myself. I never did that. I always did this. And the reason for that is that, yes, in that particular context that you are very familiar with, you don't have the need to do those things. If you have a context that is highly changeable, you have less chances to say I will or I always, because you don't know. I believe self-identity comes from three sources. One is direct experience. If I burn myself with the oven, I have a very clear idea that the oven is not good to me. Group experience or family experience. Most of us are highly influenced by the immediate caretakers and the context of them, whether we want to accept it or not. In my experience, 90% grosso modo of the people who was brought up by parents who believe in God. Is there any reason for that? No, just they didn't believe in God. Some people may change differently or think differently, but my experience is that we will follow very closely some of the things we do. And the third element is the time we live. I was brought up, I was born in a particular country, in a particular time, in a particular scientific knowledge that defines what I believe is feasible and not feasible in my lifetime. Now, that is to self-identity. What I believe is happening in terms of conflict is about what I was saying about the toolbox. For me, conflict is just that moment where my behavioral repertoire collapses, where I look at my toolbox and I don't find the thing I need to solve the immediate challenge. But it's not just that I don't find the tool, it's that I do as I believe I should be doing, as it has worked all the time. And still, my needs is not attended. I try it again, and my need is not attended. To a point that I don't have any more tools to solve or to attend my immediate need. However, I still believe, and that's the conflict, that I knew and I know a right way to act. It's just that something is not fitting now. I abide to the idea that there are two levels of conflict, and that is also coming from positive psychotherapy. One is that is the immediate conflict, and is that I am angry with you because you have decided to put my mobile phone here. I am very keen on having things ordered, and I like it here. And I'm angry with you. That is happening now. My anger is against you, and that's perfectly clear. The problem is that often we have a basic conflict, which is the conflict of socializing. Now, what does it mean that socialization conflict is? If I want to be, let me be using very plain language, as a kid I want to be loved by my parents. Is that security? I need to feel that I am going to be taken care of. As a father, if I value very much order, I'm permanently saying, oh, that's very good. You're such a good kid for putting things in order. I thank you very much. You're such a nice kid, John, or whatever it is. Over the years, it's impossible to separate for me the fact that being ordered gives me love. So I would be inclined to believe that when I am ordered, I'm going to receive what I want, which is acceptance and being loved. And that becomes completely out of my awareness. I just grew up like that. I grew thinking that order is good. When you permanently disorder my things, my experience goes at two levels. First of all, I don't want you to do things, and that's my actual level. But my anger is just my lack of sense of love. Because in practical terms, I don't care that it is here. I can just take it and put it back. What's the big deal? Still I suffer anger. I experience it. And that is the conflict of a much inner belief that order is linked with the way I want to be loved and the way I can be loved. Conflict for me, again, is never about values. We call on values normally when we have to defend our behavior, when you have to justify it. I'm doing this because my value system, it doesn't matter. Your value system is just an abstract, but what matters is how we coordinate in our behaviors today. That is what has been a conflict. And it's a conflict always about what I do or others do to me. It's not about ideas. Your ideas or your concepts about things doesn't offend me. They offend me if I have to coordinate with you something. Then it becomes an issue. And the fact that you think or you have an idea that of what it is to be free different from mine, how can it bothers me unless I do have to coordinate with you at that level? Then it becomes an issue. But then the issue is not about the idea of freedom, it's how we're going to articulate it in our relationship. That's what matters. And that comes to the second point. The conflict is never cultural. It's never a conflict between Western values and Eastern values. That's a conceptualization. The conflict happens in individuals. The conflict always happens with me dealing with you. And because I cannot find another way to explain it, I say, well, things that I'm Western and you're Eastern, and then, of course, we have to be in conflict. It is not the case. Now, in my experience, conflict happens in a transition between a conversation about what I think about things to what I am. And I can find many examples, but normally what you will find in an argument is that people start talking about things that are very, in inverted commas, objective. This telephone is better than that telephone. It's a pure pragmatic conversation. Now, there is a time when suddenly that conversation becomes an argument. And if you look what is happening in this argument, is that we're talking about that actually what happens to you, Victoria, is that you don't want to acknowledge that I made a good decision buying this one. And invested a lot of time on this. You have no clue what you're saying about. But that is a change between what I think, that this is a good product, and I invested the time and money I needed to do, to why don't you give me acknowledgement? Why don't you just say, yes, it is good? That is what the conflict becomes. And that is nothing more about my choices. Because, yes, I might have made a bad decision. Who knows? You don't know. Still, I need you, and that's my need. It's about what I am. I need you to acknowledge at some point that it is okay what I've done. And if that transition happens, and I have that need for whatever reason, then I have a conflict. And it's nothing cultural. It's about my need for your acknowledgement or for my need to be in contact with you in a particular way. Third thing about conflict is something that Berry defined in one of his papers, which is acculturative stress, and is the tension that we all suffer when we go to a different culture and we are aware that the environment is asking us to change, is expecting something different from us, but we don't do it. And because we don't do it, because we're defending what I am, eventually I'm suffering. I'm suffering because I'm permanently either defending myself, I'm permanently suffering tension from the expectations of the others, etc., etc. Acculturative stress is one of the traits for people to get into depression. What do I think happens in conflict? Well, particularly when you are away from your protected or comfortable environment, is the first thing that you experience is disorientation. And when your behavioral repertoire I don't know how often I talk with you, Victoria, and we cannot find an agreement, I still feel anger. And there's no way. I mean, I've explained you things so often in so many ways, and still, there's no way. You're so stubborn. If I'm there, my experience, before anything, is disorientation. I really don't know what to do next. It is not about choosing. There is a time when my toolbox is empty of tries. What I feel is just I've absolutely no idea what to do next. I cannot choose between one and another. I'm uncomfortable because I have no more possibility to try things. That is what disorientation is about. And for me, disorientation is necessary for any novelty. as long as I have a toolbox that I can pick, a tool in my box that I can pick, I'm not experiencing novelty. I'm just shaping my experience to what I have. I'm trying things I already know, A, B, C, D, whatever it is. In order to really, really try something new and different, you do have to at some point feel, okay, so now what? What I call about this tolerance to disorientation is the ability to stop acting with, or stop searching within a toolbox and experience the anxiety of not knowing. And there are people that are better than that. They are able to accept that I'm going to be anxious and I don't have the answer to this, and still, and that is what is tolerance to disorientation, I decide to explore it. I decide to just go with it and see where it goes. I have no certainty that I will find an agreement with Victorious on this issue, but still, I'm really engaged to be with him as long as it takes, without giving feedback, just being with him. The image that comes to my mind, and this is from, sorry, I forgot the name of the guy, but the image that for me it represents the best about what it is to be disoriented and engaging in exploration is when you are in a room and it's dark, the lights are off, and it's a room that is not a familiar environment for you, and the way you move is suddenly you extend your hands and you move around trying to find out what are your contexts about. And for me that is the experience of being disoriented and tolerated. It says, I don't know what this room is about. I know I'm in a room, but I really don't know. I don't know what is ahead of me. But still you decide to move, to explore the different elements around, to start creating a new image of your environment. A new image of what these new circumstances are about. What it is for me change? Well, change for me is again, self-identity is a simple concept. Every time I do something I've never done, I change. As simple as that. Every time I truly do something that it was not before in my toolbox, I'm changing. And it can be because I am confronted to a new challenge that I've never met before. Truly I've never done before. And then I reorganize my things to deal with it. I have never been beaten and suddenly out of a bar someone beat me. Well, what do I do with it? How do I handle the violence of this person? And if I've never done it before, I've never had to handle the violence of the other person, I would definitely be doing things that are probably something I never knew I could do. Reactions that I didn't expect of myself. Or I do something different with an old challenge. And I have an example, for example, in relationships, couple relationships. There's a lot of people that in private or professional or personal level come to say, I always meet the wrong person. I mean, it's just one after the other. It's always the wrong person I meet. Well, sometimes we're so convinced that the way a toolbox operates is good that we're unable to do different. Sometimes people decide to actually reflect on what kind of person they're looking for and look for the one that doesn't fit. And it doesn't mean that would help the person find a better relationship. It will just give them a different understanding of how they relate with people, and that will change. The way you would be drawn to change for me is only when actually your toolbox fails. As long as your toolbox is operating, you're happy. And it's perfect. You don't have to change. If your toolbox is giving you what you need, you don't have to. I would say that as long as it's serving me and is in line and adapted to my immediate environment and challenge, why would I need to change? Now, the only thing that it changes when I not getting what I want, and then is when I change. Some of the main themes of global culture. The first item or the first idea that I want to bring today is what Arnett called bicultural identity. And thus, he's a study about young adults in different parts of the world, and what he realizes young adults are living with two different identities. One that is perfectly fit with their immediate local environment, their parents, their friends, and another one that is their awareness and their involvement in a more broader culture, friends on the internet or traveling. And it can happen that these two identities are essentially different, that they could be doing and expressing ideas in the global level that they are not doing at the local one. And it's no problem, because these two environments are never in touch. You never at the same time in both. So this perfectly happens. And the reason for that is that we normally, and that's what Jon said, is that we adapt and we act to what other people expect from us. So if I am involved very often on the internet in a particular group discussion, whatever it is, I will gradually converge to what this group is doing, even if some of the ideas, some of the concepts are not in line with my local culture. The other thing that people are experiencing in the global world or being global is what is called cultural shedding, and it's that you have to unlearn that some of the things that seem to be perfectly sound in your local environment are not useful anymore when you're not in that context. And cultural shedding is not particularly simple. It's actually quite painful to let off some of the things that you have come to learn as valuable to you. And cultural shedding is one of the reasons for acculturative stress, having to let go of things that I'm particularly proud of. And what has happened at individual level? Well, more and more, due to the level of contacts around the world, the increase of migration, is that more and more people are self-selecting the way they are. We're self-selecting the way we want to be perceived and do. And someone said, well, to a point that the number of change in the people we meet, the diversity of the people we meet, is so high that identity is always work in progress. It's never, I never end to a point to say what it is to be me. It's just a search of what it is to be me in this particular moment that will be different tomorrow. Two things that are happening definitely, or two ways of expressing the same thing, is that we are more and more, particularly young individuals, less attached to our traditions. We are more ready to challenge them because we are exposed to other ways of doing. And that, as a concept, is very nice. The fact that we are less, I think it's very valuable. The thing that we have less pressure to comply with particular social rules just because they are social rules is great, but it does bring conflict because we live in local contexts where people often follow those rules. And maybe here we're unaware of what are those principles that we call real culture, because we're all very well educated and very open-minded, and we are used to a lot of diversity. We're even speaking in English. In Belgium, I'm from Spain, I can see one from France, one from Lithuania. But think on a global level what it is for a person that has to relate every day with his or her parents, with a completely different understanding, and still I have to put together the fact that I don't believe anymore in those traditions, and I want to love them, and I want to be loved by them. And that is a very interesting conflict. And many of us may not have suffered that. If you just go to anywhere in Asia, you will have that. The gap between the local culture and the global culture is so big that it makes it difficult for individuals to put them together. And that is what it is, identity confusion. Yes, it's great to have this global culture It's fantastic. It changes me. It expands my mind. It makes me believe less in my local culture. But my daily life is not on the web. My daily life is not traveling around the world. My daily life is here. It's with my friends, it's with my parents, it's with the people I meet. And unless we have an agreement of what behaviors are accepted, we always have a conflict. And that tension is what it is, identity confusion. Who I want to be. Now, in that tension, I believe we experience it in two ways. And one is inclusiveness. And what it is inclusiveness is the things I add in. If I go to the word, the Latin word or the Latin root of inclusiveness is incluire. There are two main acceptions. One is to put things inside. The other one is to enclose it. And I believe that is what it is. Inclusiveness is about things that I like about other cultures that I add and make them my culture. I made it my identity. There are things that have not been part of my real culture and still I add it to me. Where do I think inclusiveness happens? I think it happens at the level of build culture. It's things I reflect on that I believe are good, behaviors or approaches that I believe are good, and I make them mine. And they might, not necessarily, get back to my unconscious. I have an example that is quite recurrent in China in cross-cultural couples, which is how you deal with money in the family. From a Chinese point of view, I have a particular example of a Chinese wife and a Danish husband. For a Chinese, if you're in a couple, you will be willing to give money to my relatives. And that's not challenging. I mean, this is not challenging. If any of my relatives ask for money, you will give them money. That's the way it is. From a Western point of view, rarely you would do that. You will have your own account with your own savings, and I would give money if it makes sense. Why would I give money? I mean, for what? For what exactly? I mean, what do you need money for? In China, you may not even ask. I need 10,000 renminbi. That's what I need, period. Now, what would normally happen is a conflict, is that the Westerner and the Chinese will feel immensely non-loved because this person doesn't want to give money to my third cousin on my mother's side. Yeah, and the Westerner will feel challenged and they say, but why do I have to prove love that way? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. This guy, who knows what's going to do with the money? We've never met this person, for Christ's sake. Now, eventually, and I've seen that happen in China, there are Westerners that will find the inability for a Westerner to give money was offensive. People that have been long enough in China to say, who cares? I mean, 10,000 renminbi, of course, just give it. I mean, why are you so uptight about 10,000 renminbi? I mean, it's the way to do. It becomes my value. Yes, it is okay to give money. It's necessary. It's fine. It's a good way of bonding in the relationship. It's just stupid not to give it. How I believe inclusiveness happens? Well, I believe there are three levels of it. One is a pure information. I have access to a particular element of a different culture, and a concrete aspect. And when I say concrete, it's I have access to a particular behavior or activity. I don't have an access to, for example, loyalty to parents is very important in Asia. But that's not concrete. What does it mean, in particular, being loyal to your parents in Asia? How it is articulated in behavior? What I mean is a particular concrete aspect that you can take, not a concept. Second one is participation, is that you actually invest time on that. I like very much NBA games, and I just get up every bloody evening at 4 a.m. to make sure that I see the games. I invest my time on that. And the third one is that I make that particular aspect my aspect. I identify myself with that. And I have an example of a conversation that has happened to me often, and I've just put it together into some sentences. And it's something that happens when I'm in an exotic country and I say I am from Spain. The first, something they can say, something may go as, Oh, Barcelona, oh, very good. I said, yeah, I like the city too. No, I mean the soccer team. It's very good, the soccer team. Oh, okay, good. Did you see the game yesterday? They are so good. They play so beautifully. Huh? Then they are not like Real Madrid. Huh? Because in Real Madrid it's all about money, they just cry babies, they don't build their teams. Barcelona, we do different. Now, in that conversation there are 3 levels. They are aware that there's a soccer team, not even a city. There's a soccer team that plays soccer, and they like it. They invest time in watching the games through internet or whatever it is. There is a level where they identify themselves with the way Barcelona plays soccer and the philosophy of the problem. And that is, for me, the 3 levels you normally find in people. The more involvement, the more information you have, you will eventually participate more actively, and at some point, not necessarily, but at some point, you will self-select out of that pool of things what suits you. This person had access to the Spanish Soccer League. He could have chosen Real Madrid, he could have chosen Athletic Club de Bilbao, it doesn't matter. Somehow he chose to identify himself with Barcelona. That's inclusiveness. It's all about getting things in. Exposure is about putting something outside, but something more. In Latin it has an acception that I think is closer to what I want to say, is to abandon things. Exposing is about abandoning a certainty about something. And this is, and what is exposure for me is the experience of the resistance. When you resist change, when you resist to leave an idea behind, and that resistance can be mental. I can hear my inner conversation thinking all the wrong things that Victorious is saying while he's talking. No, I disagree. What I'm going to say later. But it can be physical, even not mental. I can feel my body resisting. I can feel a twinkling in my stomach, or I'm uncomfortable. That is for me exposing in a cross-cultural environment. You have realized that, yes, if I want to change, if I want to carry on, I have to let go of something. I might not choose to. Exposure is not the decision to let go of things. It's the experience that, wow, if I want to carry on in this conversation and still loving Victorious, I might have to change something, or be loved by Victorious. Now, I believe that exposure, unlike inclusiveness, is normally happening in the real culture, in the things that we have assumed as good and eternal, that suddenly come into question. So this guy, are you joking? You don't believe in God? You must be joking. It's impossible. Everybody knows. I mean, it's so absolute. And somehow I can't convince him. I can't. It doesn't mean that I have to change, but let's go to a lower level. Let's come back to the example of giving money. But are you nuts? Well, I'm going to give money to your third cousin on your mother's side if we never met him. And there's a point with this person saying, okay, then you don't love me. But I love you. No, you don't. You don't, because you don't want to give money to my third cousin on my mother's side. But that's impossible. How can you put together these two things? But I'm doing it. So how are we going to get together in this marriage? Are you going to give money or not? Or I can ask, are you going to, for Christ's sake, grow up and split, giving money to your third cousin on your mother's side and me loving you as the same issue? No. At some point, I will have to accept that this person will feel love if I put this thing together. Or the other person will understand that they have to split those things to feel loved by me. Until this conversation about giving money happens, I had never before in my life believed that someone would believe that I'm not loving her because I don't want to give money to the third cousin's mother. Never ever. Suddenly it comes to me and I realize that I have an assumption of what you do with money within a couple. It may become part of the build culture if I decide to do something about it. I might, in that conversation, simply break forever the relationship and then we divorce and that's it. Or I might decide to work a third and it becomes for part of my judgment of how we deal with things. So it comes from an encounter with a global culture, with for me an encounter with a different culture, puts into question my real culture, and become aware of my real culture. I decide to transform it into built culture. What is the process for me? Well, unexpected feedback. Another example, my team member in China says, well, my grandma is very sick and I have to go to my village. So, well, very bad timing, can you wait until tomorrow because today is a business plan meeting. And from that moment onwards, this employee simply doesn't trust me anymore. No matter what I do, no matter how I explain how important the meeting was, even it doesn't matter how much I explain later when I see the reaction that I was wrong, I can't anymore put this person in trust in me. I don't have any more tools. I did not expect that this person would be so frustrated. I didn't expect that the frustration would lead to not trusting me. It's not even angry with me, it's not trusting me anymore. And I don't have any tool to redirect this situation. Normally, when something awkward happens, I normally have two choices, and this comes from Spinelli, an existentialist therapist, which he normally says, well, we normally have two routes. Either I decide to explore what is happening, and therefore I increase my sense of not knowing, or my sense of uncertainty, and in teams, my sense of being vulnerable to just don't know what's going on, or just simply dissociate, and just deny purely that is anything about me. It's all about this guy. This particular guy is very sensitive. Effectively, the grandmother passed a week later and still is holding me grudges for that. It's just Chinese people are too attached to their families. It doesn't make any sense. It's nothing to do about me. It's about the other. So I just ignore that my toolbox is not working anymore. If you decide to explore it, then it goes what I say disorientation, because you don't know how I go around that. I carry on doing things with this person, and he's not getting me back in track. He's not trusting me as a part of a team member, and at this time where I really don't know what else to do with this person. I really don't know what to do. But I might decide to carry on talking with this person, just trying to see where we go. So I know what I don't want to do, but I still don't know what I want to do. There's a third level when I carry on exploring when something emerges. Something out of my relationship with this person gradually comes into shape, and that shape becomes a particular choice for me in behavior that I like more than not. I do believe that we feel exposure the farther away we are from what I call the protected environment. And my protected environment is that environment where, no matter what I say, I'm permanently validated by my context. It's people that share my real culture, so I don't have to explain myself. Just do things and it's taken for granted. If I'm very far away from it, there's a greater tension that I might feel exposed. I do believe there are three levels of being in the global culture. One that I call local, contact, and immersion, and high inclusiveness, high exposure, I'm immersed. Low of them is local, somewhere in between something that I call local. And I can be close to schizophrenia if I have completely separated my global identity and my local identity, and they happen to be together at some point and still I'm separating them. I have a dual culture, a dual identity. Or I can be in a ghetto. I'm highly exposed to the other culture, but I decide not to take anything on board from that culture. Just in a ghetto, surrounded by my own immediate local, little contact with other cultures, and my coordination at professional and personal level is only required for those who share my real culture, those assumptions behind the back. Contact is a situation where I do have regular contact with other cultures, but my coordination is only required for my professional level or my social level. It doesn't mean that I have to be permanently coordinating behavior. Sometimes I don't have to. Most of the time I don't have to. But most importantly, regardless the coordination I'm required, I have very, very, very fast access to my real culture protected environment. I can easily switch off that global culture and come back to a place that everybody believes that Jon is a great guy and the way he thinks is acceptable and we all love him and it's fine. He has his issues, but it's okay. Immersion is a place where coordinating with people that are essentially different is just not required. It is what you have to be doing. You don't have a choice. And it's not only professional or social, you have to be permanently coordinated on a professional level and on a social level. And you don't have access, immediate access, to your protected environment that will tell you, Jon, you're nice. Don't worry. I mean, this is just a work issue. You're fine. Relax. It's fine. This is what is normally happening now. Either you have people who are only focused on the domestic market or domestic environment, which is the local people, or you have big corporations that are sending experts as general managers around the world or leading teams, the result of delocalizing to Southeast Asia, and you have big cultural teams. And what I mean by that is that normally you find organizations that have an expat, no matter where it comes from, leading a team that is made for local people. And that becomes a dual. Maybe this expat is not only European, maybe it's American, but the contrast is between the leading team and the local people. So it's bicultural, it's not multicultural. What I see the future coming, I think the future is in contact. And I think that the people eventually will have to be in a situation where you have a selected self-identity, and therefore you have a selective protected real culture. So you don't need anymore a very fixed, concrete place to be there. You will actually have quite accessible access to the world that gives you nice, Jon, don't worry. And I think that most of us will have that. And how I say that we're going towards contact instead of more immersion? Well, first of all, because the trend is to have mega cities with a high degree of multicultural elements. Shanghai, Beijing, Guangdong, by 2050 will be more than 40 million each. And they will have a level of multicultural index as the same as what you find today in New York or London. So you will have a lot of people living in those environments. Global competition is obviously going to spread. And there is more and more, and they will go more and more towards home-based work and virtual teams. Teams that are permanently in contact with the web. 90% of the time. So for these people, they don't need to be immersed in any place because their daily life is actually where they choose to be. And there might be some discussion of will there be physical teams or virtual teams only. I have clients as a coach and as a counselor which I've never met physically. And still it works. So I'm not saying that every single organization will be able to live without physical contact. I think that there will be less and less, and therefore what we'll be looking at is situations where people have to be in a situation of contact. We don't have to train people to be immersed in another culture because you were selecting your own culture. You will be selecting your own group, which is a much more positive than trying to train people for immersion, which is very difficult. What is the skills that people try to build in inclusiveness? Open-minded, cultural knowledge, cultural sensitiveness, positive intent about the other, assertiveness in the sense of being able to express your views without challenging the other, capacity of bringing consensus and networking, which are essential skills if you want to open to another culture. It's just that it's not enough. Because what will happen most of that is that there will be a time when we cannot accept what is happening on the other end. We cannot be this open-minded that everything is okay. And when it's not okay, we need people to be trained in exposure skills. And that is being able to be aware of my own internal processes, being able to understand what is anger for me and how I manifest my anger, risk-taking. People that are going to be leading multicultural teams need to be risk takers, but not risk takers in the sense that that they have to make decisions on investment, or is risk taking because they will have to change. They will have to behave differently if they want to lead a team with very different cultures, and they have to take a risk to change without knowing if the change is the best possible. And it's a risk because you're leaving behind something that you thought it was a good way of doing. They will have to be tolerant to disorientation. They will be able to accept the things are going. They will have to be able to deal with anxiety and with sharing vulnerabilities. One thing that for me was written by Brian already in 1997 that actually expresses it very well is that we have to be looking people that step outside their cultural boundary and that are able to make the strange familiar, and that is inclusiveness. I bring in things that were strange and I made them familiar. But most importantly, to make the familiar strange. To things that I have believed to be good, I have to let them out. And that is, this learning process is one of the key elements, and it's one of the things that we're not looking in organizations. And for me, that ability to make the familiar strange is essentially linked with exposure skills. What is happening in organizations? We're primarily looking at inclusiveness skills in people, in experts. We only train in leaders and managers in that. So we're taking an expat and sending it to China, and the one that receives training in cross-cultural elements is the manager. What about the team? They're going to experience another culture and being led, and you don't invest a euro in helping them understand the other guy. So you train your people to be culturally sensitive to Chinese values, even if the values are expressed very different in each single member of your team. The third element for me is that, as I said before, mainly it's about two local cultures, not necessarily multicultural, and we're not training people in multicultural elements, but in how to deal with two different cultures. And organizations are helping experts, and one of the things that are helping more and more is through coaching. Still, most organizations, they don't know why it works. And they don't know why it works because they have not yet connected that being able to deal with cross-cultural issues is very much related to self-identity, to self-awareness. And they're still looking at coaching as a way to improve performance instead of simply improving your own self-management skills or self-awareness skills. Some concluding remarks. If we avoid culture, conflict, what we're doing effectively is imposing a way of doing in others. In order not to impose a way of doing, not impose our toolbox, we have to be able to accept that toolbox is incomplete. And therefore we have to explore the conflict when this toolbox is not working properly. Doesn't mean that you have to change every time there's a conflict. It means that you have to explore the conflict as an avenue not to impose the way you do things and learn something. We have to be looking at self-identity. You have to, when you send people that are going to lead or work in multicultural teams, you have to be looking about how the people that perceive themselves and how much they know about themselves, more than how much they know about the other cultures. It is good to know. It's not that important. How I know, how I react to conflict when my values are challenged is much more important than what I know about the Chinese values. It doesn't matter what the values are. If I know how I normally react, that is much more added value to the team than knowing that Chinese people don't give clocks as a present. We have to train people in understanding their skills and reactions to how we feel exposure. I don't think the organizations will require more experts in the future. I think that we will all have teams where we are all experts to each other. And because we will eventually break this idea of two cultures, the local ones and the experts. We will have a much more diverse teams where it's going to be difficult to identify what is the leading culture. What are the values that have to be decided and shared? It will be more a creation of values within the team, because it would be impossible to be ethnocentric, saying this is our German company, that the way we do. Coaching is a good tool, but there's a lot of need on the coaching world to prepare coaches to deal with that. In my experience, only coaches that have been trained on a psychology therapy level are actually able to have meaningful conversations about self-identity with their clients. It doesn't mean that all the coaches are not that way, and maybe coaches that are great without that training. My experience says that if you really want to be dealing with self-identity, you have to train coaches more than what they are trained today. And something that is, for me, interesting is that you can't have a training on cross-cultural things. First of all, because it's about self-identity. I think that if you have the ability to identify where this person is going to be working, is working on a local level, on a contact level, or is going to be immersed in that culture, and how this person perceives themselves in terms of inclusiveness and exposure, then you can tailor-make the training instead of just giving an overall idea of what it is to be in a different culture, which it is just, for me, not valuable if I don't know how I operate as an individual. What could be done next? Well, it would be great to actually link all the work that HR managers are doing in terms of assessing tools of performance and teams. One example could be 360 and how they define the skills, and see if there is actually a linkage between the inclusiveness skills and exposure skills, and whether they make any difference. There are different dimensions or not. I don't know. A better define the transition of the different levels of what it is to be in a local, in a contact environment or in an immersion environment, to see if there is a need for different skills at those levels, which is the next one. Is there any connection between those skills and those levels? It would be interesting to actually look at what is going to happen in mega cities as a way to test what it is to be in contact environments. And finally, it would be nice to have a questionnaire or a tool that ranks the experience of exposure or inclusiveness and see whether there is a change through different interventions. One could be coaching. And that's it. Thank you very much.